Hey everybody. I'm going to go over the quiz review, the quiz 2, for folks who had trouble with it or need some prep. Your first task is to make a circuit with 6 LEDs and 6 resistors, an Arduino, and a breadboard. Um, and then to wire up those LEDs so that they can each individually be controlled. So I dragged my components out here um, so that I'm ready to start wiring these up. Now remember, the resistance should be 220 ohms. So I'm going to try to quickly change these all to 220 ohms. Um, and then I'm going to move them to the breadboard. And start wiring them up. You can actually just copy your circuit from your um, kit simulation if you have it. It's the same circuit. So I'm going to put these LEDs on my breadboard, sort of spaced out a little bit so that they're easy to wire up. Um, I'm going to wire the cathode side to the resistor. How do I know they're connected? If I hover over this line, notice that the resistor and the leg of the LED both have green circles around them. That means that they're in the same line and they're connected. So I'm going to repeat that with all of my LEDs. Oops, I need one more LED. Okay, so now all 6 LEDs are on my breadboard. Now I want to get some power from the Arduino. So I'm going to start by wiring the ground to the negative bus down here. And just for testing purposes, I'm going to wire the positive 5 volts to the positive bus. I'm going to change the colors of these so I know which is negative, which is usually black, and which is positive. Now I'm going to wire up this bus up here because that's the one that I'm using to connect to. So my positive bus on the bottom gets connected to my positive bus on the top, and my negative bus on the bottom gets connected to my negative bus on the top. Now, to make a complete circuit, I need to make the current go through the LED, which means that I have to wire up the other prong of each LED. So for now, I'm going to connect them all to positive just to make sure that they're all turning on correctly. So for each one, if I hover over, I can see the row where I'm connected to the anode of the LED. And for each, the anode is going to get connected to the positive bus. And then when I click Start Simulation, they will all turn on. That's a good test that you've wired it correctly. Okay, but I don't actually want these all to just turn on at the same time. I want to be able to control them. So now I'm going to disconnect the positive bus and instead connect each of them to a control pin on the Arduino. So I'm going to start with LED number 1, and I'm going to connect it to pin 2. I start at pin 2 because pin 0 and 1 are not actually control pins on the Arduino. Okay, so I've wired up LED 1. I'm just going to continue and wire each of these to the next pin in the sequence. So LED 2 gets connected to pin 3. I'm just changing the wire colors so it makes it easier to see what is connected to which pin. Um, You don't have to choose any specific colors if you decide to do this. Just making them different makes it easier to see which one is which. Okay, so now each of my LEDs is connected to a pin on here. And if I hit start simulation, now I broke it. It doesn't turn on. But that's because I haven't coded it to tell it to do so. So I'm going to switch this to text. And now here, um, if I want to see is any of this working, I can change the code that's here. But the first task that you were given was to create variables for each of the LEDs and the delay time. So to create a variable, I type in int. It doesn't have to be int, but for now we're using integers. So we're going to say int LED1, and I'm going to set this to pin 2 because LED1 is connected to pin 2. I'm going to continue for each of the other LEDs, um, giving them the pin number that they're connected to. So now I have a variable for each of my LEDs, and I'm going to make an variable for my delay time. This just means that when things are sitting and waiting, they're going to wait for 500 milliseconds, which is half a second. Okay, so now the next step, it says to use a for loop to initialize all of the LEDs. But before I do that, I'm going to test and just make sure I can get one LED to light up. So I'm going to change this to LED1, which corresponds to this first LED. And then you'll notice I already have this digital write command that sends a signal to whatever pin I want to control. So here I'm going to say LED1. That will turn LED1 on, and then I'm going to turn LED off. So digital write high turns it on, digital write low turns it off. And I'm going to change this delay time to my variable that I have for the delay time. And now when I turn it on, pin 1, LED1 should blink, and it does. Okay, so now I want to use a for loop to initialize all of my pins at once. So you can look in the reference for how to do that, or look at your assignment. I think it was task 21 that did for loops. So I'm going to use a variable to address each of the pins. I'm just going to call it X. You can call it Fred if you want, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to start at pin 2, and I'm going to go up to pin 7. And I want it to automatically count up by 1. So these are the conditions for my for loop. And now inside of the loop, I just need this one line of code. But instead of using LED1, I want it to do this for each of the LEDs. So I'm going to let it count from 2 to 7 and initialize each of these. And then I just need to close my loop. Okay, so now this will initialize each of these LEDs. I can check. I only have code down here for LED1, but it should still blink, and it does. Okay, so now I need to write the code to turn on the LEDs that I want to turn on. So I have code here to turn on LED1. my pattern that I'm looking for, I want to turn on 1 and 6 at the same time. So I am going to also tell it to send a signal at the same time to pin 6. Then it's going to stay on for my delay time, which in this case is 500 milliseconds. Now, after those have turned on, I want to turn them off and turn the next LEDs on. So I have to turn off pin 6. Now, I don't need a second delay time because they're just going to stay off. So this turns on 2 pins at a time. My first step is to turn on pins 1 and 6. My next step is to turn on pins 2 and 5. So I can copy and paste my code and just change this to 2 and 5. Okay. And I'm going to paste this again and change it to pins 3 and 4. So I've turned on pins 1 and 6, then pins 2 and 5, then pins 3 and 4. Now I need to go back the other direction and turn on pins 2 and 5, and finally pins 1 and 6. So this should be all of my code. And now when I run it, I should see the correct lighting pattern. And indeed I do. And that's it.